He felt an acute sense of being unloved by the man who was, for all intents and purposes, his other half. Julian, his chief of staff, always maintained the perfect, impenetrable deference of a subordinate. It was agonizing. He needed to feel something to provoke a reaction. So, upon returning from a diplomatic summit, he brought Ricardo with him, a young aide from San Mateo whose sharp cheekbones and dark eyes were, as Alex made sure the rumors would suggest, a mirror of a younger Julian. Back in Washington, Julian acted as if nothing had happened, leading the cabinet members to greet Air Force One on the tarmac. He didn't even offer a hint of disdain. The feeling of being wronged festered in Alex, growing more acute with every sip of bourbon. The liquor finally took hold, and he stormed into the West Wing office where Julian was working late. He felt a desperate need to ask Julian, to demand why he wouldn't even grant him the gift of jealousy, and what punishment he deserved for such a slight. Inside the quiet office, Julian was a still, compliant presence next to him. A faint warmth still lingered on his cheeks, making his pale skin seem almost translucent under the desk lamp, like polished alabaster. Alex was overwhelmed with a familiar ache of affection, a desire so strong he wished he could physically tether the man to his side, to never be apart. He wanted to speak, to break the silence, but talking about policy felt wrong. The atmosphere was too fragile, and he wouldn't risk shattering it for a debate on budget resolutions. Bringing up Ricardo was even more unthinkable. He had never touched the young man, and to discuss it too much would unravel the lie. Besides, the simple fact that Julian hadn't reacted was a profound blow to his pride. Then he had an idea. The cherry blossoms around the tidal basin were in peak bloom, a sight he knew Julian must appreciate. He spoke softly, calling Julian by a name that was his alone, a relic from their shared past. The name was a private joke, a reference to Julian's lean, composed form and the quiet, almost austere elegance with which he moved. He was the most striking man in D.C., with understated features and eyes that held a calm, thoughtful quality, as if a gentle wind were turning the pages of an old book. He was perpetually slender, favoring bespoke suits in charcoal gray that were subtly embroidered with a bamboo leaf pattern on the inner lining. A faint, clean scent always clung to him, a custom cologne from a small perfumier in Georgetown that was said to linger for days. When Julian stood in quiet contemplation, he resembled a heron, poised and captivating. Alex had once remarked on it, offering the nickname. Julian had just smiled, a rare and fleeting thing, and thanked him. From then on, it became Alex's most intimate term of endearment, especially since Julian never let him use more familiar titles. Pulled from his thoughts, he saw Julian looking at him, his gaze wide and bewildered, his eyes shimmering. Alex felt a pang of regret for causing him distress, for making him look so vulnerable. It stirred a familiar, dangerous heat within him that he had only just managed to suppress. He forced himself to picture the most unattractive members of Congress to quell the rising urge. 43, Julian said suddenly. Alex was startled and asked what he meant. Julian clarified that he was speaking of the columns on the Jefferson Memorial, visible from the window. 43 of them. Most people who looked at the monument would praise its neoclassical grandeur or its tribute to democratic ideals. Julian counted the columns. It was then Alex knew with certainty that his chief of staff was unlike anyone else. He was singular, but he also knew that for a man to stand alone in the cold night air counting columns, he must be profoundly lonely. It meant that Julian was affected by Ricardo's presence. He was hurt. He cared. A wave of relief washed over Alex, soothing not just his body but his soul. He tangled his fingers in Julian's dark, soft hair, feeling the impossible tension within him finally yield. He needed to say something to make Julian happy. He remembered that General Thorne had requested a transfer back to the Pentagon after 4 years overseeing the Southern Command. Marcus Thorne was Julian's oldest friend. The news of his return would surely please him. He told Julian that Marcus had submitted his official request to return to D.C. As predicted, Julian's expression softened, his features relaxing into a quiet, private happiness. Alex felt a surge of triumph. He was the only one who could read the subtle currents of Julian's heart. But the pleasure was brief. Julian's brow furrowed again as he questioned why Marcus would leave his post when the border with San Mateo was so unstable. Always the patriot, his Julian weighing national security even when it came to a reunion with his closest friend. Of course, Marcus was returning because of Alex. The bourbon had made him slow. Marcus's encrypted message had been blunt, citing rumors of a destabilizing influence and a fear that Alex was being compromised, ending with a pointed inquiry about Julian's well-being. He was returning to confront Alex about Ricardo. In their circle, Alex had somehow become the villain, simply for trying to elicit a spark of jealousy from the man he loved. He wondered if Julian also saw him as faithless, just as Marcus did. A surge of anger rose in him. He grabbed a handful of Julian's hair, forcing him to look up. He commented on how pitiable his beautiful Julian looked, and how the great General Thorne was racing back to D.C. to defend his honor over a fabricated affair. He asked bitterly if he was the cruelest man in the whole country to him. Julian's eyes were rimmed with red, his collar askew, revealing the sharp line of his collarbone. He looked like a wounded bird, tragically beautiful in his brokenness. Alex felt his own heart skip a beat. Julian slowly closed his eyes and sighed, his voice barely a whisper. He reminded Alex of his promise, that he was his shadow. That was from 12 years ago, the second year of their campaign for the presidency. Alex had been caught in a political trap, and Julian, ignoring his own safety and a serious illness, had pledged his unwavering loyalty. He had been only 21 then, already sacrificing his health for Alex, leaving him with a chronic susceptibility to cold. At the time, Alex's heart had been full of gratitude and a dizzying, unfamiliar affection. Now, hearing those same words, Julian's meaning was clear. They were an inseparable, devoted pair. Knowing Julian held him in his heart brought a rush of joy. But still, even after being provoked, Julian wouldn't say the words Alex longed to hear. With his sharp intellect, he had to know what Alex truly wanted. His refusal felt like a fresh wound. An unloved president couldn't share a bed with his chief of staff. He could only return to the lonely residence and bury himself in intelligence briefings all night. It was a difficult existence. He wondered if he had pulled Julian's hair too hard. He slapped his own right hand viciously. He told his attendant to have the kitchen send a slice of devil's food cake to the chief of staff's office, along with the cashmere throw from his study, knowing Julian was always cold. After the new year, Marcus Thorne returned. Julian arrived at the Oval Office early from his Georgetown home, sitting impeccably, sipping tea. He was wearing a new suit, clearly for Marcus's benefit. Jealousy flared in Alex. He would make Marcus pay for this later. But first, he had to show concern for Julian. The holidays had been a whirlwind of ceremonies and state functions, exhausting for a president and even more so for his chief of staff. They had been so busy, spending only New Year's Eve together in the residence, sharing a quiet vigil before falling asleep side by side. They hadn't been alone together for nearly 2 weeks since. Looking at Julian's pale face, Alex was genuinely worried. He asked if his cough was still bad at night, and if he was taking the medication prescribed. Julian's expression softened, and he offered a faint smile, assuring him that the cough was much milder than in previous winters and that the doctor's prescription was working well. Julian then looked down and muttered something else, a hint of grievance in his tone, but Alex couldn't catch it. Before he could ask, the distinct sound of military boots on marble announced Marcus's arrival. The man had no sense of timing. He was so eager to confront Alex on Julian's behalf that he hadn't even changed out of his combat fatigues. A gruff voice announced General Marcus Thorne. Alex dismissed his aides and pretended not to hear, letting Marcus stand at attention. He tapped his pen against an inkwell. Julian put down his teacup and rose to quietly prepare a fresh cup of coffee for him. The familiar scent of Julian's cologne settled Alex's nerves. He decided, for Julian's sake, to be magnanimous. He told the general to be at ease and take a seat. Marcus stood up but didn't sit, instead turning to Julian with a formal nod. He asked how Julian had been. Julian smiled back, his voice filled with genuine pleasure, saying he was well and remarking that the humid heat of the south must have been hard on Marcus, who looked thinner. Thinner? Marcus Thorne was built like a linebacker. Alex couldn't believe Julian was fussing over another man in front of him. He let out a cold scoff, remarking that if anyone had lost weight from working around the clock, it was him, and yet his own chief of staff hadn't seemed to notice. Julian looked stricken, as if he were about to apologize formally. Why did he look at him like that? Alex loved him, yet Julian feared him. His fists clenched under the desk, his nails digging into his palms. He couldn't bear to see that fear in Julian's eyes, so he changed the subject, turning his attention to Marcus. He asked the general what was so urgent that it required his immediate return to D.C. Marcus answered with undisguised irritation. He reported that the smear campaigns against Julian had reached even the forward operating bases. The attacks accused Julian of arrogance, of using civil service reforms to purge political opponents. To block Julian's proposed regulations on corporate mergers, they had even fabricated astrological nonsense about a dark star appearing next to the president's. Marcus was red-faced with anger, slapping his thigh and declaring it all garbage. Alex and Julian had already reviewed those ridiculous intelligence briefs, but hearing the accusations aloud again stirred a fresh wave of anger. There was, however, something absurdly comical about seeing the hardened, 8-foot-tall general so flustered he was nearly in tears. Alex sighed and gently reminded him to maintain a certain decorum in the Oval Office. Marcus shot back that this was him being restrained. Alex should have heard how he described those corrupt politicians back at the base. He said that if it weren't for their incompetence, the supply lines wouldn't have been delayed during last year's crisis. He then added that he'd heard even worse on his way back to the Capitol, mentioning some trashy online political fictions with utterly preposterous titles. Marcus hesitated before finally spitting out the name of one: the Prince of Pennsylvania Avenue. This time, neither Alex nor Julian could contain their laughter. Julian hid his mouth behind his sleeve, while Alex slumped over his desk, shaking with mirth. The title was surprisingly accurate. Julian could only be his prince. After he had recovered, Alex wiped his eyes and resumed his presidential composure. He pointed out that he was the one who had co-authored the reforms with Julian and that he was the one protecting him. He asked what good Marcus's return would do. Marcus looked up, his eyes full of accusation, asking if the president, with his new favorite, would still protect Julian. He wondered aloud who would be next after the boy from San Mateo. He accused Alex of letting his loyal partner take the heat while he enjoyed the company of a new companion. Marcus hadn't changed. After 4 years away, he still couldn't be in a room with Alex for 5 minutes without starting a fight. Julian spoke up quietly, suggesting that the general was tired from his journey and should return to his residence to refresh himself before a formal debriefing. Alex was incensed. Marcus was slandering him and Julian was defending the general. Ricardo was a means to an end. He had never even touched the one person in his life he was publicly tied to, his wife. He was Julian's partner. Fury boiled over, and he slammed his hand on the desk, demanding to know if Marcus thought he couldn't handle the southern border without him. Marcus stood his ground, retorting that he only knew the administration couldn't function without Julian. The tension in the room was palpable, shattering the porcelain teacup that fell to the floor. An angry voice from Julian cut through the standoff, rebuking the general for his insolence and demanding he apologize to the president. Julian was angry. Julian was defending him. Hearing Julian's words, Marcus scowled and reluctantly knelt, offering a begrudging apology for his lack of restraint. Alex, being the president, couldn't act on impulse like Marcus. He had to give Julian the respect he was due. Julian summoned an aide, who brought a new teacup. He took it and personally poured Alex a fresh cup. Julian's wrist was slender and pale, making the dark glaze of the cup seem dull in comparison. The red string bracelet Alex had given him for Christmas was just visible beneath his cuff. The warmth and comfort of that holiday night together spread through him once more. He took a satisfying sip. Tea served by Julian was infinitely better. Feeling content, he was ready to discuss official matters. He finally looked at Marcus, still kneeling on the floor. He told him to rise and to report on the urgent military intelligence he had. A coup in San Mateo. The second prince had been assassinated, or so it was thought. He had been missing for 3 months. They had captured a spy from the new regime who claimed they had traced the prince to the American South. Alex recalled that this prince was one of the few moderates in San Mateo's politics. The country, once a stable neighbor, had grown hostile after gaining economic power. Under the previous administration, a border conflict had been lost, allowing San Mateo to break from their treaty obligations and become an independent, aggressive state. The country was divided between war hawks and peace advocates, with the popular second prince leading the latter. Marcus stated his intention to request a covert assignment to the south to find the prince. This aligned perfectly with Alex's own thoughts. If they could get to the prince first and form an alliance, they could use his influence to reestablish a friendly government and secure the southern border. Despite their constant bickering, Marcus was the general he trusted most. He authorized the mission, telling Marcus to be wary of one person while he was there. In perfect unison, he and Julian spoke the name. Senator Alistair Crane. You helped me make my chief of staff jealous, Mr. Vargas. When do I get to go and take that old buzzard's head off? The man sitting in the garden was strikingly beautiful, with sly, phoenix-like eyes and a small mole near the corner of one that gave him an alluring, almost androgynous quality. Yet this same man held a heavy piece of military hardware across his lap as he sat on the stone bench. This was the aide Alex had brought back from the south. His true identity was not some political hanger-on, but the missing second prince of San Mateo. Alex stood with his hands behind his back, staring down the impatient prince. The young man finally realized his mistake, stood up, and straightened his clothes, offering a proper bow. Ricardo Vargas, at your service, Mr. President. Alex sat and gestured for him to rise before speaking. He told him that he couldn't get near Alistair Crane alone, and that his weapon would only get him killed. Ricardo, face flushed with anger, demanded to know what he was supposed to do then. Just watch as Crane profited from the chaos he created, while his people suffered. He slammed the butt of his rifle on the ground. Alex rubbed his temples. He hadn't finished speaking. Did Ricardo really think he had brought him all this way for a chat? He sighed in exasperation. The man looked so delicate but had the temper of a firecracker. Ricardo sat down brazenly at the table across from him. He pointed out that if he didn't look so delicate, he wouldn't have been convincing enough to make the president's partner jealous. He leaned in conspiratorially. "About you and Mr. Croft," Alex cut him off. He informed Ricardo that he was arranging for him to travel south again, this time with General Thorne. Ricardo's eyes lit up. He asked if he meant Marcus Thorne, the general who had repeatedly outmaneuvered his older brother's army. Alex looked at him as if he were insane. Thorne had defeated his family's forces, and he was happy about it. Ricardo waved his hand dismissively before catching himself and clearing his throat. He said that the president wouldn't understand. A hero is born a hero. Leaving Ricardo's safe house, Alex felt the first snowflakes of the new year begin to fall. Before he could get into his car, he saw a familiar figure. It was Julian, standing in the snow, wearing a dark red cashmere scarf that made him stand out like a winter rose against the white backdrop, a breathtaking sight. Alex took the umbrella from his Secret Service agent and walked towards Julian, creating a small, private world for the two of them beneath it. He remarked on the unseasonable chill and asked why Julian had come all this way. As he got closer, he saw that Julian's nose was red from the cold. After 18 years, Julian's face could still make his heart race. He instinctively reached out to touch his cheek but met only cold air. Julian had taken a step back. He stepped out from under the umbrella and bowed formally. "Mr. President." He was kneeling at Alex's feet, disturbing a layer of fresh snow. Alex reminded him of their agreement that such formalities were unnecessary when they were alone. He bent down to help Julian up, but Julian sidestepped his gesture. He coughed several times into his sleeve, staggering as he rose. He said that with the president's busy schedule, it was remarkable he remembered such trivial things. There was a sour note in the air. Julian was jealous. He still loved him. Alex loved seeing these flashes of emotion. It made the usually composed, rule-abiding chief of staff seem so much more alive. He crouched down, looking up at Julian with a smile. "Is something troubling you?" Was it because he had come to see the young aide? "No." "Do you dislike me seeing other people?" "No." Although Julian maintained a level tone, his eyes remained fixed on the ground. He hadn't looked at Alex once. He was too endearing. Alex's heart felt like it was melting. He adopted a pleading tone, asking why Julian wouldn't look at him, begging for just one glance. Julian looked at him then, his gaze cold and filled with a restraint that suggested he wanted nothing more than to punch him. And he probably would have, if not for the tragic events that had reshaped his past. The old Julian would have decked him, then demanded he send Ricardo packing, and then extorted a collection of rare books and modern art as compensation. Alex's thoughts were shattered by the sound of Julian's racking coughs. He had seemed better that morning. He steadied Julian, rubbing his back, but the coughing was severe, and he could barely stand. Alex took his hand. It was as cold as ice. The ache in his chest was unbearable. In that moment, titles and protocols meant nothing. He lifted Julian into his arms and carried him straight to the waiting armored limousine. Back to the residence. He told Julian he could yell, he could hit him, he could do whatever he wanted. Julian felt lighter than ever, as if a strong gust of wind could snatch him away. A sudden, irrational fear gripped Alex, and he could only hold Julian's hand tighter. Julian was listless in the car, and by the time they reached the White House residence, he was feverish and unconscious. The presidential physician assured him it wasn't as severe as previous bouts. which offered only a sliver of relief. Alex canceled his morning appointments due to the heavy snowfall and sat by Julian's bed, sorting through briefings. The new officials he and Julian had championed were reporting difficulties in implementing their reforms, while the old guard, led by Senator Crane, continued their baseless attacks. The public censure of two of Crane's allies last year seemed to have had no deterrent effect. It was infuriating and exhausting, but having Julian there, asleep beside him, made it bearable. His eyelashes cast long shadows on his cheeks. "Dad, don't go." Julian was talking in his sleep. His eyes flew open, and he grabbed Alex's hand like a lifeline. "Alex, go to your father. Tell him my family had nothing to do with the Evergreen Fund or the dam project. It was all Crane's scheme. You're the only one who can save my family. Save my father. Only you." Alex knew that in his fevered state, Julian was lost in that terrible past. He didn't remember that Alex was president now. He hadn't called him by his first name in years, not while awake. Alex responded just as he had 12 years ago, promising he would go to the president at once and plead his case. A single tear traced a path from the corner of Julian's eye. "It's too late. It's all too late." Julian's gaze seemed to fix on a distant point. He murmured that his father used to say the brightest lights burn out the fastest, and his mother said their family's honor demanded a sacrifice on the national stage. He wondered what he was supposed to do. His strength gave out, and he fell back into a deep sleep. Alex looked at Julian's gaunt face, feeling a hollow space open up inside him. The memories, cold and sharp as the wind outside, came rushing back. It was during the previous administration 15 years ago. That spring, two massive scandals rocked the nation: the Evergreen Fund embezzlement and the catastrophic failure of a federal dam project. The public was outraged. The president, Alex's father, ordered his then Secretary of State, Alastair Crane, to lead the investigation. Crane delivered, producing a long list of culprits after a thorough investigation of his own political turf. The list included several of Crane's own party members, who were clearly sacrificial lambs, but this act of seeming impartiality completely won over the president's trust. The president was focused on another name on that list: Julian's father, the esteemed Secretary of Commerce. Crane presented a perfectly constructed chain of evidence that was irrefutably damning. Any discerning eye could see that such perfection was a hallmark of a frame-up, but Alex's father believed it without question. He immediately ordered federal agents to raid the Croft residence and take all male family members into custody. They even came for Julian. At that time, Julian was already instrumental in Alex's political rise, serving as his top aide and living in an apartment in the same building. When he heard the news of his family's arrest, Julian collapsed, coughing up blood. Alex had barred the federal agents from his apartment, declaring that Julian was part of his staff and that with the investigation still open, they had no authority to arrest him. He had bluffed them into retreating, but within hours, they returned with a warrant signed by the president himself, explicitly ordering Julian's arrest. The lead agent had apologized curtly before his men rushed forward to seize the weakened Julian. Alex had shoved them aside, shouting that they weren't needed. He held Julian in his arms, feeling how light he was, and couldn't bear the thought of letting him go to that place. Julian had grabbed his collar, his voice trembling but firm, insisting that a presidential order could not be defied. Alex had gritted his teeth and told the agents outside that he would personally escort him. He carried Julian to the car, repeating over and over, "Trust me. I'll get you out of there soon." After dropping Julian off, Alex raced to the White House, but it was after hours, and the gates were locked. He was barred from entering. Marcus Thorne, alerted by a frantic message from one of Alex's aides, appeared at the gate just in time. He lied, claiming an urgent national security threat that required immediate presidential attention. His father finally authorized the gates to be opened, allowing Alex to plead his case. He argued that Julian had been with him constantly since he was 19, that he knew his every move, and that even if his father were guilty, Julian could not possibly be complicit. He had even presented years of correspondence between Julian and his family as proof. His father had reviewed them and finally relented, securing Julian's release. The night Alex brought him back, Julian was just as he was now, his eyes bright with fever. He held Alex's hand and begged him to save his family, insisting on his father's innocence. Alex submitted appeal after appeal, but they went unanswered or worse, were returned with written reprimands from his father. When Julian's fever broke and his mind cleared, he was overcome with despair, his face as pale as a sheet of paper. But he had smiled at Alex. He thanked him and said he had done his best, and that it was enough. The next day, the news of his family's complete ruin was all over the capital. It rained torrentially that day. Julian disappeared for the entire night. When he returned, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was soaked to the bone. He locked himself in his room. Alex sat outside his door, watching the rain fall in sheets, the drops shattering on the ground. The distant roll of thunder drowned out the sound of Julian's weeping. Alex had spoken through the door, promising that he would always be on his side, that he should never retreat, never compromise with them. The arrival of a tray of food from an aide pulled him from the memory. The past was colder than the snowstorm raging outside. 3 days later, Julian finally woke up. Alex had just finished his morning briefing and rushed back to the residence without even changing out of his suit. He hurried to the bedside and asked Julian if he was in any discomfort, if there was anything he wanted to eat. Julian was paler and thinner, and it pained Alex to see him this way. Julian gently patted the space on the bed next to him, but gestured for Alex to wait. He told him to change first, that it was still cold outside and he shouldn't bring the chill into the room. Before Alex could call for an attendant, Julian was already pushing himself up. "Let me, Mr. President. My hands are cold, you shouldn't. It's fine." Julian gently removed the presidential pin from Alex's lapel. "It has been a long time since I've helped you dress," he murmured. This brought back another memory, a time before the presidency, when Alex would ramble on about the political games and rivalries of his peers. And Julian would listen with a quiet smile, offering his insightful analysis. Sometimes they wouldn't talk politics at all, getting tangled up with each other before the clothes were even fully off. Shaking himself from the reverie, Alex took Julian's hand, wishing time could stop right there. Julian's fingers paused while fastening a button, but he said nothing. After Alex was dressed in casual clothes, Julian moved to kneel before him. "What are you doing?" He asked for the president's permission to accompany General Thorne to the south. Alex was stunned. This was completely unexpected. The most important thing was to get Julian off the floor. He told him to get up first, then they could discuss it. He helped Julian onto the bed, where he coughed for a long while before continuing. He argued that the president already knew from his last trip that Senator Crane's family ran the region like a personal fiefdom, seizing land, intimidating farmers, and even sabotaging infrastructure to force them into tenancy. They were involved in human trafficking and extortion. This trip was the perfect opportunity. He asked for permission to go with Marcus. It was true, as Julian said. His last trip south had been a carefully orchestrated charade by Crane, but Alex had seen through the cracks. He knew that out of his sight, the people were suffering even more. He argued that Marcus was enough, that Julian was still recovering from a major illness and couldn't handle the strain of the journey. Julian countered that Marcus had been stationed at the border and wasn't familiar with Crane's current network. To go in blind was too risky. With his help, the plan to take down Crane and find the prince would have a much higher chance of success. So, Julian was willing to drag his sick body across the country because Marcus would be in danger alone. What about him? Before his own trip south, Alex had pleaded with him to come along, but Julian had insisted on staying behind to manage the affairs of state. Was Marcus more important than him? What was he to Julian? A cold voice emerged from Alex's throat. So it's for the general. Fine. I approve. Who am I to stand in the way of such devotion? He turned to leave, but Julian grabbed his sleeve, giving it a gentle tug. Alex didn't want to stop, but he was afraid Julian would fall. He still needed to call the doctor for him. Julian's voice was low but firm. Removing Crane is a move we planned long ago, Mr. President. I would give my life to see it through. Alex covered his mouth. Those soft, warm lips shouldn't speak such chilling words. Don't talk about dying. Never. Julian looked at him with a smile in his eyes. Alex had always known that the owner of those eyes possessed a brilliant, intricate mind. He was going south not just for Alex, but for the bloody revenge he so desperately needed. Alex knew all of this, but all it took was one small gesture of affection from Julian, and he was powerless to refuse. Even if it was a trap, he would walk into it with his eyes closed. He sighed, admitting defeat. He told him there was one more person going with them. Julian asked if the president was also going. No, it's the aide I brought back. Julian's expression instantly soured, his lips tightening into a thin line, his brow furrowed. This mission is critical, Mr. President. This is not a time for games. He sounded like a stern professor. Alex's mood suddenly lifted. He lightly tapped Julian's nose. Are you angry? Do you think your partner is an incompetent fool? Julian turned his head away. I would not dare presume, sir. Actually, he isn't just an aide. He's the missing prince. Julian turned back, his eyes wide with shock. The Prince of San Mateo has been reduced to working as a political aide to make money? Alex laughed. Your brain must be fever-addled. Of course, that's just a cover story. It was the only way to get him past Crane's notice and bring him safely to D.C. A 2-for-1 deal. He coughed pointedly. I seem to have overplayed my hand. He glanced at Julian and saw him staring back with a cold smile. He remarked that the Aegean blue vase on the mantelpiece was quite beautiful. He had been found out. Now came the extortion. For a moment, the old Julian was back. Alex had never thought he'd see that part of him again. What was a vase compared to that? If he wanted the entire White House, Alex would give it to him. He smiled obsequiously and asked what else his dearest Julian desired. Julian, while saying he couldn't possibly accept such generosity, proceeded to pack a case with a recently acquired collection of rare geological samples and a set of antique fountain pens from a Virginia estate. Alex tried to push his luck, suggesting they spend the night together, but Julian shut him down, citing his weak condition. Whoever said being president came with special privileges? He was still just lying next to the man he loved, silently drooling. On the day of Julian's departure, the magnolias were in full bloom. Alex held his hand, rambling anxiously. I'm sending my 4 best agents with you. They're highly skilled. I'll feel better. The agents need to protect you, Mr. President. I'll have Marcus with me. No, just take the entire Secret Service detail. The manpower will be useful. The Secret Service is for domestic security. We're going undercover, not setting up a command post. Alex paced the Oval Office like a caged animal, his mind filled with images of Julian being ambushed by bandits, by cartel thugs, by Crane's mercenaries. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't gamble with Julian's safety. It was a bet he couldn't afford to lose. "Mr. President." Julian's calm voice soothed him. "Don't worry. Your health is fragile. The journey will be exhausting and dangerous. How can I not worry? Ricardo is a wanted man in his own country, and Crane is in league with the new regime. If Ricardo wasn't a master of disguise, I would never let you go near such a dangerous situation. No, I'll go with you. I'll have my things packed now. I'll go on another unofficial trip." Julian looked at him with a smile, a sight more beautiful than the blooming magnolias. For a moment, Alex was frozen, feeling like a clumsy, love-struck teenager again. Julian gently pulled him into an embrace, patting his back as one would a child. 6 months at most. I'll be back by autumn. You must have the best Maryland blue crabs waiting for me." Julian's embrace was warm and smelled wonderful. It made it even harder to let go. Alex buried his face in Julian's shoulder, secretly wiping away a tear. It was the cologne, not the separation. "You have to write to me often." "I will. Besides the official reports. Write to me as your partner." "I will. If you feel unwell, you have to tell Marcus. The travel will be hard. You must eat well." "I will remember." "Julian, I'm here. Come back soon. I'll be waiting." Julian wrote that they had arrived in the South safely. He was not telling the truth. Marcus's encrypted report told a different story. The journey had been difficult, and Julian had fallen ill several times, at one point coughing up blood. Yet Julian summarized it all with the word "safely." Alex chose to believe it was to keep him from worrying. He kept Julian's letter under his pillow, tracing the lines of his handwriting over and over before sleep, imagining Julian's expression as he wrote, his gaze resting on the very paper he now held. Julian wrote about teasing Ricardo, telling him that his and Marcus's names sounded like they belonged to a pair of old gunslingers. Ricardo had gotten flustered, stomping his foot and insisting he didn't want to be the man's partner. Julian wrote about the beauty of the southern landscape, the vastness of the country. He wrote about the poverty he witnessed among the rural communities. 3 pages filled with observations on everything from local politics to farming techniques, but not a single word about missing him. Alex couldn't sleep. He got up to write back. "Every day I think of you, but I do not see you. Too sentimental." He tossed it. "I think of you when I walk. I think of you when I sit." That made it sound like he was neglecting his duties. He tossed that one too. "The one I think of is a world away." That felt right. The South was so far from him, and Julian's heart felt even farther. The lotus flowers in the White House pond bloomed. The summer was oppressively hot, but the tension in the cabinet room was glacial. Acting on intelligence from Julian's team and his own observations from his trip, Alex coordinated a 2-front attack. He reassigned Crane's key allies to remote, insignificant posts in the north, having them secretly detained en route to federal custody. In the south, Julian's team gathered evidence for the eventual impeachment and prosecution of the senator. Crane, who was semi-retired and spent most of his time at his southern estate, was usually only consulted on major policy decisions via secure channels. As his network began to crumble, the old fox rushed back to D.C. He saw Julian's official medical leave and Marcus Thorne's off-the-books assignment and realized he had fallen for a diversion. But he wasn't concerned. He had never respected Julian, always seeing him as the weak son of a defeated rival. But it was this young man he so disdained who was about to deliver a devastating blow. 2 weeks later, Julian submitted a report detailing the seizure of $7 million in untaxed assets from Crane's son and his associates in the South. Marcus's addendum was filled with profanity, stating that failure to execute the scumbags would be an insult to the soldiers who had died from illness due to lack of funding caused by their graft. Marcus had a right to be angry. Years ago, a delay in military funding from the South had cost them dearly in a border engagement, turning a winning offensive into a desperate defense. That same conflict had destabilized San Mateo's government, leading to the second prince's exile. Marcus wrote in a secure message that Crane was losing his nerve and had sent a message inviting him and Julian for a visit to his estate when he returned. Julian's own message was uncharacteristically excited. It had been 6 years since their last direct confrontation. Times had changed. This time they would win. 6 years had passed so quickly. It was the year after Julian's family had been destroyed. Alex's father, the president, was gravely ill and rarely appeared in public, leaving Alex as vice president to manage the country. To consolidate his power and ensure a stable transition, Julian had argued that they needed to bring Senator Alistair Crane into their fold. When Julian had forced those words out, Alex and Marcus had been stunned. They knew it was the strategically sound move, but they had both instinctively avoided it. Marcus had been the first to speak, reminding Julian that if they allied with him, they would be colleagues. Julian had given a bitter laugh and said he knew, and that he would endure it. 2 days later, they hosted Crane for dinner at the vice president's residence. Crane, while feigning deference, carried himself with the arrogance of a kingmaker. He had looked at Julian and remarked how surprising it was to see him there, asking if he had already forgotten the pain of his father's death. Alex had gripped his wine glass, signaling to Marcus that if Julian reacted, he would throw the wine and Marcus would draw the concealed weapon they both carried. They were ready to sever ties with Crane at a moment's notice. They didn't need the old senator. But Julian had raised his glass, his voice steady. As long as I serve this country, the president is my father. The president is merely convalescing. Why do you speak of a father's death, Senator? Crane had studied Julian for a long moment before bursting into laughter. He raised his glass and toasted the vice president's shrewd judgment, pledging his full support. After Crane left, Julian seemed to deflate, his straight posture slumping. He leaned on the table, clutching his chest, gasping for air as tears fell like broken pearls onto the polished wood. Alex held him, telling him it was his fault, all his fault. Julian gently pushed him away, his eyes downcast. It's not your fault, Alex. Only with you as president can we bring him down. He took Alex's hand. You told me never to compromise with them. Alex sensed how fragile Julian was and had him stay the night. In the middle of the night, he woke to find the space beside him cold. He sat up with a start and saw Julian standing by a table, his profile obscured in the candlelight. Julian? His voice caught in his throat. He was frozen. Julian was holding his right hand directly over the flame of a candle, as if he felt no pain. What are you doing? The hair on his arms stood on end. He rushed over and pulled Julian's hand away. The palm was a mess of blistered, raw flesh. Alex, today I sat with my father's murderer. We drank together. Actually, Julian looked up then, and Alex saw that his eyes were bloodshot and his face was streaked with tears. He trembled as he spoke. What is this burn? It's not nearly enough to atone. Alex could never forget the endless stream of tears that night, a lifetime of sorrow that could never be wiped away. He treated the burn, and Julian didn't even flinch, as if he needed the pain to keep him company instead of Alex. After that day, Julian never called him Alex again, not while he was conscious. Alex had thought that once he gained the presidency, he would have the ultimate power to dismantle Crane's network, to clear Julian's family name, to remove every obstacle so they could be together. They would reform the nation, a legendary partnership for the history books. But as he stood at the pinnacle of power, Julian drifted further and further away. He knew Julian should hate him, should keep his distance. His father had destroyed his family, and he, the son, had used that tragedy for his own political gain, forcing Julian to break his own principles and play nice with his father's killer. But he still wanted his love. He wanted Julian to love him. He wanted him. Mr. President, Mrs. Vance is here to see you. The voice of his aide broke through his thoughts. He rotated his stiff neck and put on his presidential mask. Send her in. Isabel Vance, Alistair Crane's eldest daughter. She had known Alex, Julian, and Marcus since they were young. She was the only first lady in his life, the casualty of a political deal. They were polite strangers who had never shared a bed. This was the first time she had ever come to the Oval Office. She said she had heard Julian and Marcus were in the South, suggesting they were there for a break, a little official business. She fiddled with a small scented sachet in her hands. Julian has suffered so much over the years. He deserves a break. I still remember the day I moved into the vice president's residence. The usually calm Julian was in his apartment, and I could hear things breaking. You were sleeping on the floor in your office, torn between guilt and relief. In the end, my family owes Julian too much. I took his place. My father destroyed his. Isabel's voice broke, and tears streamed down her face. She wiped them away and composed herself. I only learned today that my father is returning to the South. What awaits Julian is a war fought without weapons. My father is ruthless. He secretly commissioned a specialist to create a unique chemical toxin. The victim dies within 2 weeks, but the final days are spent in unimaginable agony. You must be prepared. She solemnly handed him the sachet. Inside are the 2 doses of the antidote my father gave me years ago. There are no others in the world. Please have them sent to Julian and Marcus by the fastest possible means. Isabel was the gentlest woman Alex had ever known, like a clear, tranquil pond in a garden. He had never seen her so resolute. Alistair Crane is your father. Why are you helping us? Isabel gave a small, sad laugh. I hate him. He never saw me as a daughter, only a political tool. To make me marry you, he had my lover killed. She was a brilliant, innocent girl. She was only 22. Isabel closed her eyes in pain, sobbing uncontrollably. Alex had never heard this story. He was filled with a sense of pity. He told her the dead were gone, and the living had to carry on for them. He promised the antidote would be sent immediately. Thank you. Isabel stopped crying. I have a ledger here. I swapped it for a fake during a family visit. It details my father's financial transactions with the junta in San Mateo. She knelt before him. Even though I hate him, he is still my father. I hope, in light of my full confession, you will grant him the mercy of a quick end. Watching Isabel's slender back as she left, Alex felt a delayed sense of loneliness. In this gilded cage of a city, everyone had their reasons, their compromises. No one was truly free. It was early autumn, the chrysanthemums on the verge of blooming. Good news came frequently from Julian and Marcus. Marcus reported that Crane's sudden weakening had panicked the regime in San Mateo. They had captured several of their spies in the South, who, under interrogation, revealed that San Mateo was on the brink of collapse due to financial ruin and a spreading epidemic. After taking down Crane, Marcus would return directly to the border to launch a surprise attack. Ricardo supported this plan and promised that if he were to take power, he would willingly re-enter a formal alliance with the United States. Julian's letters were much lighter in tone. He wrote that the southern food was exquisite and that he had gained so much weight he was unrecognizable. This rare, childish note from Julian made Alex laugh out loud. He wrote back, "My Julian is lovely and far too thin. Eat your fill. Return fat and happy." Ricardo's letter contained something different. He wrote that one day they had passed a fortune teller in New Orleans who had stopped them. The man had pointed at Julian and said, "You are 25. You have 55 years of life left. The one you love is a great man, but he is fated to live only to 30. Ricardo wrote that Julian had been furious, coldly tossing back, "He will live a long life. I'll give him the years I have to spare." Alex read that passage over and over, from afternoon to dusk, from dusk to deep night, a smile fixed on his face. Julian didn't express it, but he did love him. He wrote back to Ricardo, "Street psychics are charlatans looking for a payday. Tell Julian not to be angry. We will both live long lives and grow old together." For the next 2 weeks, aside from publicly releasing the ledger and formalizing the charges against Crane, Alex thought only of that letter. Even the dreary, rainy days seemed bright. He wondered if his happiness was causing hallucinations. Why were Ricardo and Marcus suddenly bursting out of the pages of their letters and into his Oval Office, breathless and bypassing all protocol, grabbing him and pulling him towards the door? "Are you trying to abduct me? Am I dreaming?" Ricardo spoke first. "Crane committed suicide. His body is en route to D.C. His assets have been seized and his sons are in custody, per your orders." And Marcus continued, "Julian's been poisoned. He's dying." Alex didn't know how he got to the hospital. When he became aware of his surroundings, he was kneeling beside a bed. The Julian lying on it was so pale he was nearly transparent. His breathing shallow, a steady trickle of blood coming from the corner of his mouth. Alex heard the distinct sound of his own heart breaking. How could this happen? How? He grabbed Marcus by the collar. "I sent the antidote. I warned you. Why is he lying here? Marcus, how did you fail to protect him?" For the first time, Alex saw Marcus with tears in his eyes. He fell to his knees. "We were careful at Crane's dinner. We had the antidote with us. Julian, he told us Isabel gave him 3 doses. It wasn't until he collapsed that I realized. He gave the 2 real ones to me and Ricardo." Alex's world spun and he almost fell. The head of the medical team stood before him, head bowed. "Mr. President, I've never seen a toxin like this. We've administered a palliative to ease the pain and slow its progress. But I've called in every specialist. We are doing everything we can." Alex threw the water glass from the bedside table against the wall. "What do you mean, everything you can? If you can't save him, I'll have you all." The words Julian had said to him in the past echoed in his mind. "No collective punishment. Don't harm the innocent." He slumped, defeated, and went to Julian, who was still bleeding even in his coma. He took a cloth from a nurse. "Get every specialist in the country to this hospital now." The cloths became soaked, one after another, in dark red, then blackish red. There was no word to describe this color. It was the color of grief. Why? Why save everyone else? Why save the world, but not save you and me? Isabel rushed to the hospital when she heard the news. She was nearly hysterical, shaking her head over and over. "There is no more antidote. The chemist who created it was killed by my father the day it was finished. This shattered his last hope." Alex asked Marcus how long they had been traveling. He remembered Isabel saying the poison took 2 weeks to be fatal. He needed to know how much time he and Julian had left. 11 days, non-stop. So they only had 4 days left. He dismissed everyone from the room. They were too loud. Julian needed to rest. He knelt by the bed and pressed his cheek against Julian's palm. The scar on his right hand was a painful ridge against his skin. What were you thinking, Julian, when you gave away the antidote? Were you thinking you should never have loved me? Or were you trying one last time to create a scar of atonement? He knew that giving away the antidote was not just kindness. It was Julian's penance. He should have known Julian had a death wish. Crane had orchestrated his family's ruin. His own father had signed the order. They were both his father's murderers, and he was the murderer's son. Julian couldn't even stand to dine with one of them without burning himself afterward. How could he ever allow himself to love the son of the other? He knew now that Julian loved him, and he knew how much that love had tormented him. The very thing he had fought so hard to prove was the thing that had killed the man he loved. I don't want you to love me anymore, Julian. Hate me, resent me, treat me like a stranger. I just want you to live. Just live. Alex wept by Julian's bed, sobbing like a child. Fool. A hoarse voice whispered. Alex looked up, shocked and overjoyed, to see Julian's eyes weakly open. Don't cry, Alex. Julian was unconscious most of the time. The medicine wouldn't stay down, mixing with the blood that trickled from his lips. Alex fed it to him from his own mouth, bit by bit. Julian would cough, murmuring in his sleep. Alex, it hurts. He held him day and night, whispering in his ear, I'm with you. I'm right here. It felt like a dagger had been thrust into his chest, carving out a hole that the winter wind howled through. Julian, what do I do? How do I save you? In his few lucid moments, Julian was as calm and composed as ever, looking at Alex in a way that created the illusion that he wasn't dying, just recovering from a bad cold. But then he would cover his mouth with a handkerchief, and the bloodstains would shatter the fantasy. He told Alex that with Crane dead and his cronies in custody, the president needed to act swiftly and finalize their punishment. He shouldn't be wasting time at his bedside. Delays were dangerous. He was pushing him away, again and again. How could Alex leave him? Every moment was precious. He stayed until Julian, unable to bear the pain any longer, doubled over, beads of sweat on his forehead. Then Alex understood. He was hiding his suffering. He didn't want Alex to see him in his final, agonizing moments. Fine, I'll go back. He reluctantly held Julian's hand. I'll finish my work and be right back. Julian waved him away, too weak to speak. But Alex didn't leave. He hid outside the room and listened to his heart-wrenching cries of pain. The agony was so profound Alex felt he couldn't breathe. He had never believed in gods or miracles, but now he prayed to any deity that would listen. He clasped his hands and knelt in the hallway, begging for the pain to be transferred to him, for this fate to be his instead. Let my Julian live. Perhaps his prayers were answered. On the third day, Julian seemed to rally. He was bleeding less, and the painkillers finally seemed to be working. He no longer clenched his fists until his knuckles were white, and he stopped telling Alex to leave. Before falling asleep, he held Alex's hand and murmured, Alex, do you remember the promise we made before I left D.C.? Alex gently stroked his hair. Of course, I remember. The best blue crabs are waiting for you. The day after tomorrow is the 4th of July. We can watch the fireworks and eat crabs, how about that? The 15-day deadline was the day before the holiday. But Alex hoped, prayed, that love could create a miracle, that this promise could tether Julian to life for one more day. Just one more day of mercy. But Julian smiled and shook his head. Aren't you going to share them with me, Alex? I really want some crab. I want some tomorrow. I want you to wear the suit you wore when you were just a congressman. As he finished speaking, he fell back into unconsciousness. Julian slept until dusk the next day. Alex put on a suit from the back of his closet, one he hadn't worn since he was a young, ambitious congressman before the vice presidency. Standing before the mirror, it felt like time had rewound to a happier era, a time he had taken for granted, a time that was gone forever. Alex, you look handsome. Julian was looking at him, his eyes red-rimmed. The next moment, he threw himself into Alex's arms, holding him tightly. It had been years since they had embraced with such abandon. Alex could hardly remember the last time. He was afraid to squeeze too hard, afraid of breaking his most precious treasure. It might have been his imagination, but Julian seemed stronger than he had in days. He could even walk out into the garden unassisted. Alex had already instructed the staff to set up a small, private dinner, as if for a family celebration. Julian smiled and gave every staff member a generous tip, telling them to go home to their families for the holiday. Soon it was just the two of them under the rising evening lights. Alex shelled the crab for him, placing the meat on his plate. Julian ate, gently swaying with pleasure, an unconscious habit he had whenever he enjoyed a meal. The moon rose high in the sky. Julian smiled at him and raised his teacup. To me, Alex, congratulate me. I got my revenge. I killed Alistair Crane. He drank it all in one go. He paused, then asked a sudden, jarring question. Your father killed my father. What am I to do? The question was so abrupt Alex didn't know how to answer. At that moment, Julian's teacup fell from his hand, and he fell with it. Alex lunged forward, catching him and pulling him into his arms. Are you dizzy? What's wrong? Doctor. Julian raised a hand and gently covered Alex's mouth, shaking his head. No outsiders. Just us. Okay. It was then Alex saw that Julian's face was deathly pale, like a piece of white jade about to shatter. His life was draining away, but he stubbornly asked again. Your father killed my father. What am I to do? If you want revenge, you can only kill the father. Julian finished for him. Alex, that night before the former president died. The heart medication you brought him, I tampered with it. He should have lasted a few more months. Couldn't wait. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath, a nearly manic smile on his face. Your father killed my father. I killed your father. Alex, you should hate me. He was smiling, but blood was trickling from his lips. Alex frantically tried to wipe it away with his sleeve, but it wouldn't stop. I don't hate you. I don't hate you at all. Stop bleeding. Stop smiling. Julian, tell me, how can I save you? What can I do to keep you here? I'm begging you, just tell me. Teach me. Julian's hand gently touched his cheek. Don't cry, Alex. Look, the moon is out. I want to hear that poem, the one about the moon. Recite it for me. Alex held Julian tightly, reciting the lines every schoolchild knew. Men have sorrow and joy, they part and meet again. The moon dims or shines, it waxes or wanes. Nothing in this world is ever perfect. May we all be blessed with longevity. At that moment, Julian's hand slipped from his grasp. The autumn wind rose, scattering the last of the garden's flowers. Tears streamed down Alex's face, and he choked, a mouthful of blood rising in his own throat. Though miles apart, we are still able to share the beauty of the same moon. Julian was dead. He was sleeping forever in that cold, silent casket. Alex went to the old oak tree on their university campus. It was from a time before he was even vice president, before the Croft family was destroyed. It was here, with Marcus as their witness, that he and Julian had pledged themselves to each other. They had buried a small box with their written vows and tokens, promising to return as old men to open it together. Now only Alex would grow old. He dug up the box. Inside, the paper with their vows had been slashed in two by a knife. On top of it was a note in Julian's handwriting. Alex Vance. In another life, let us grow old together. Fresh tears welled up, enough to last a lifetime. So it was Julian who had destroyed their vows. When had he done it? How much pain must he have been in? So much pain. Alex took out the tokens from the box. Julian's was a silver cufflink engraved with an intricate knot, symbolizing an unbreakable bond. His was his mother's locket, his most prized possession. His mother came from a humble background, and before Julian, she had been his only solace. But his father, the president, had found an excuse to have her dismissed from their lives, ruining her. He had said that his successor could not have such a commoner for a mother. Alex hated his father for that. The tampered medication. He knew everything. He was willing to be Julian's weapon because that weapon also had its own target. But Julian had never spoken of it to him. He didn't trust that Alex's love could be stronger than blood. And Alex had never found the courage to tell him the truth. He reburied the torn vows and Julian's note, letting the secrets lie forever in the earth. Julian, wait for me. Once I have finished the reforms we started, I will come to you in the afterlife and explain everything. He placed the locket in Julian's casket, keeping the knotted cufflink for himself. When his time came, it would be placed in his. He stroked Julian's cold face one last time. You have to recognize me in the next life. We will be together then. From the Vance administration, a biography of Julian Croft. Upon Croft's death, the president, dressed in informal attire, personally attended the funeral. He leaned on the casket and wept, collapsing from grief several times. He suspended all government functions for 10 days, personally composed the eulogy, and had it carved in stone. The nation mourned with him. From the Presidential Archives of Alexander Vance. In the 30th year of his second term, the president retired, taking the title of President Emeritus. He served for 30 years, a period known as the Vance Restoration. He secured the southern border, appointed capable officials, purged corruption, enacted sweeping corporate reforms, and oversaw an era of peace and prosperity. At the age of 85, the president contracted pneumonia and, after a short illness, passed away in the White House. He was 85 years old.